Welcome back to Meeks and Bradley and our ELD lessons here. This is Plural Nouns Week 3, so it's our third installation with some more of our irregular spelling changes that we see in our English language. So we're going to be heading into some recap here first. Nouns. As we remember, they are our people, places, things, and ideas. So when we talk about plurals, we're talking about nouns in the English language. Only nouns get plurals. So, kind of like last lesson, we had the Y that would change to an I and add ES, or some people refer to it as drop the Y and add IES. So this is a similar rule where we are gonna have nouns that end in F or FE. And so this F is gonna get that change, and so we'll see that coming up. Here we have words like life and leaf, so there's our FE and our F ending, scarf, wife, loaf, and knife. So these are all words that when we make them plural, we have to remember that kind of irregular change. So moving into our actual rule, the nouns that end in F and FE, drop the F and FE and add VES. So whether you choose to think of it as dropping the F or FE or changing it, the rule results are still the same. So we have life, which is gonna become lives. So we drop that F or FE, we get lives. Then we have leaf, so leaves. Then scarf, which becomes scarves. Next we have wife and wives. You just want to add these to your notes so you can practice them. Loaf becomes loaves. And lastly, our knife, which becomes knives. And yes, we'll be covering that rule later, but yes, that K is silent, but we're focusing on this F change here, VES. So lives, leaves, scarves, wives, loaves, and knives. Right. So rule number 2, now we have irregular nouns. Now these are rules that are typically exceptions to the rules, or words that are exceptions. They often follow a different pattern that originates in the parent language. So common examples of other parent languages that we discussed one last week. We'll see it again later. Sometimes parent languages might be Italian or Greek or Latin. So there are other languages that English chooses to honor and maintain their original spellings. And then sometimes there's no pattern at all, right? So we're gonna take a look at child. So this is not childs, this would now be children. So as we go into our next slide, we'll look at those irregular plural spellings. So some of these words include child, foot, goose, man, mouse, and person. And very often as ELD teachers, we see students who, they maintain that pattern. They try to add that S because that's what's consistent. But again, irregularities, exceptions to the rule. So let's give this a try. So foot becomes feet. So no S there, no V's, nothing different, a whole new spelling. So these exceptions, you just have to memorize them, practice them, use them. Tooth becomes teeth. And I know what you're thinking, you're like, oh, I see a pattern. That's coincidence. Then we have man becomes men. And woman becomes women. Then we have fungus and cactus. Now this one's a little bit different because the original rule is that plural becomes fungi and cactus becomes cacti, but recently it has become acceptable to use words like funguses and cactuses. So if you do that, Your spelling check might not say it's an error because it's become acceptable, but these are the originals that honor the home language. But if you were to use funguses, gotta check those spellings there, funguses or cactuses, you'd be okay. So you'll see both of these at some point. So we're gonna continue with our irregular nouns. When we make them plural, these are words that have no patterns at all whatsoever, so you have to memorize them through practice, through reading. It just takes time, or in this day of technology, you can just look them up. But child becomes children. Let's make that a proper end there. Okay. Then a person, I've seen person spelled persons with an S in certain
So start with people again.
People again, yes, okay. Persons has been used as a plural, but for the most part, person will be people. So we want to make sure that we practice using them, and again, just make corrections as they come along. Mouse as a plural is mice. And again, there's no reason to most of these. Ox is oxen. And it's possible that you'll see similarities in words, but for the most part, we're just gonna memorize their spelling. Goose, kind of like our foot and tooth, that double O, we have the double E now, geese. And lastly, for our die, one die is D-I-E, but when there's two or more, they are dice. D-I-C-E. All right, and I would recommend if you have the opportunity, practice using them in sentences, challenge yourself to use them in singular or plural, just so you get that practice. Now, rule number 3, this is no change at all. These are words that are spelled the same way as they are singular and plural. So here we have some nouns do not change, so we use the same words for singular and plural. And just to recap from our previous lessons, the word plural means more than one. More than. Or as my students like to say sometimes, 2 or more, right? So let's look at the no changes. For no changes, whether it's one sheep or many sheep, it is going to be sheep. Then we have, it's interesting, right? This is $1, but as money, right? Money is money. It's not money and monies, but just money. And if you did make that mistake, that's okay. That just shows you're understanding patterns, but this has a no change rule. Same thing with shrimp, whether it's one or many. Shrimp. Then we have pants and pants. If you want to show that there's multiple pants, you would say pairs of pants. But pants is always pants, whether it's one pair, 2 pairs, or many pants. Deer, same thing, so you'll notice animals, items, people, places, things, deer. And lastly, we have our news. So if you're listening to the news on TV or reading the news is news. All right, so our last one here, this is our remember page. So the one thing about English is that there's always an exception to the rule. Once you think you've got the rules down, you think you know them, something pops up, and that's mostly because English is made up of many languages. So chef and cliff, right? We have that F ending. They're not going to be changed to V's. They're going to stay just at an S, right? Chefs and cliffs. Then we have our parent languages. Last week we talked about piano being Italian. We talked about nacho being from Spanish. These are languages, parent languages that we honor, so we do not change it for our English rules. We maintain it as pianos, just adding the S as they would in their language. Same thing with nachos. And then our last one, fish and quiz. This was from our very first week. We have fish or fishes, both are acceptable, and quiz and quizzes, which actually uses our double Z. So when it comes to English, the thing I think that's the best now in this generation is we have technology. We could always look it up to make sure, and that's what we should do. So if you feel like there's an exception, don't let it stress you out. Look it up, practice it. That's part of the learning process. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to leave them in our podcast responses and comments. With my students, they notice a lot of differences between languages, so it's always great to see what you have to bring to the table. Thanks for joining ELD with Meeks and Buck.